Hey people, I'm in the forest and I'm stuck with this rain. Got pretty deep and so roads are so slippery with a slicky that I cannot just get out for easy. A bunch of trees are falling because they just standing on this clay and mud, I would say. And it's not like thin fracture, it's just, has little rocks inside, so looks just exactly like the clay and mud that was coming out of mud volcanoes I've showed in that video. So probably water is hard to get out of this clay, and the roots are just becoming wet too much and just die, and the trees get knocked over by the winds because the roots are not getting them stable anymore. It's the main reason, is what I can observe. A bunch of trees, a bunch of mud, a bunch of fallen, broken, muddy roots, and that's the case that we observe here nearby Moscow. So the footage I took from the plane fits perfectly in these conditions that we observe. The trees are not stable because of the roots are getting wet too much because of the clay, and mud is not very good absorbent of water, so it doesn't let those trees survive. Because those fresh trees are also new trees, or not new trees, living trees, living not long ago, also get knocked over by the wind. Not on the old ones, and those are already dead by some reason, right? So we see a bunch of different examples, and the trees are all over the place. So let's connect some dots, guys. We see a bunch of clay all over the place. We see a bunch of trees. Then we have to find some bunch of buried structures, and we find them, and they called mounds or kurgans or burial hills. And I made a bunch of videos on those. So what I'm trying to say, that is proving the point that everything was buried with the clay and mud. And it was not that long ago, because the trees are like 50 years old. So think about it. Here you see, there's some new trees that just fell. They didn't have green tops yet. Another one here. So trees are just, falling down. How much of them? Just plenty. Somebody says because of some insects, but I don't see any insects on those trees. Actually, what I actually see, if there's even some insects, and I mean people couldn't be lying, I think we have to take an account that all this stuff is planted on the mud. Not a very healthy soil for the trees, right? So probably that's the best reason to explain it. The mud was probably used to deactivate the area after some certain bombardment or something. And after eruption of the mud of this fountain, they could be filling the area pretty much equally in each and every place, the same layer of 3+ meters deep. Right? In some areas, we see up to 8 meters, 15 meters. Depends on the place, right? It depends on that landscape that it was before. So liquid clay and mud is just, you know, spreading like on the mud volcanoes from the hill towards, you know, it's making the hill first, making it a little bit slightly different in the landscape, and then the flow from the top is reaching the bottom with the angle curve, and then it starts to be growing the hill, and at the same time filling up the same area with pretty much the same equal level of the flow, just like you have in a bath or something. To think about if you like in the bath and you have to fill the bath, but the water is coming from below, not from the above, then that's the only difference, right? And you have it in all the areas pretty much at the same time in one region, maybe in two different regions, but you know, neighboring to each other. I'm not saying each and every place in the world was simultaneously attacked like that. I'm saying it could be done with step-by-step operation if the people knew what they were doing, how to ignite those processes, how to make it happen actually. And there's no conspiracy in making a council on some certain event and meeting of the people, making them, you know, decide what to do. What is the conspiracy? Each and every meeting is conspiracy then, but no. We're talking about some secret meetings that actually do happen in nowadays also. So what do you think about the planning of such event? Tell me in the comments. So all those burial hills could be just the roofs of the buildings where people were saving themselves from the flood. And we don't know the truth actually, because around 3,000 burial hills per year were destroyed in Russia in the end of 19th century with special teams, special archaeology teams that were like, you know, robbing those places. Thousands and thousands and thousands of those are lost right now. And trees are right above the place, above those burial hills. So we don't see any older trees on them. So that leads me to the point that these are just the buried houses, destroyed and buried by the mud flood. Maybe at first they were attacked by something, or maybe they were just, you know, buried by the mud flood. Who knows? Why I'm saying about the attack is because the point that a mud is great observant is not only due to the water, it's also due to the different chemicals, solutions, soils and stuff like these, salts, and radiation itself. It's officially measurable and countable. Mud absorbs radiation. So, finishing the topic, we were talking about this with the global vision on that video that we had together. So what I'm trying to say is that we have some signs of attack, but not everywhere, and we have some signs of mud flooded areas mostly everywhere and almost everywhere. So that is not excluding each and everything that we talk about, but that is not actually the point. Okay, so I kind of agree that there could be a war, and the war could be before the mud flood. And probably I was the guy who was talking about the vaporization of the trees and forests in large numbers, which could lead to the moisture exhaust to the atmosphere, and that could be actually changing the weather for several months, including changing the year to be the year without the summer, which was actually on the calendars and was put in the calendar in 1816. So what that means is that that was probably before the mud flood, because mud flood was covering up the story first of all, and probably absorbing all the radiation and the leftovers of those people that were hiding in the houses after the attacks, maybe several months or several years after the attack. And after the mud flood, they probably waited a couple of years to populate the area with the new waves of people from the rural areas, from where people were probably gathered into the camps or something. Who knows? What actually the technique was, maybe they used kids, and we see a bunch of evidence of large amounts of pictures with kids, right? So I'm not saying mud flood is something that was the cause of that, but the wars are also could be, along with the mud floods, leading us to those pictures that we see. And they sometimes even explain some, some destruction that we also see on the antique cities, because the mud flood itself doesn't have the ability to destroy the constructions, destroy the walls. That's why liquefaction itself doesn't work, because during the liquefaction you have the earthquake, and you have the walls sinking to some side, leaning to some sides, and this is how it doesn't work actually. But if you have some flow, like a mud volcano eruption, you have it like slow, and you have it the way it doesn't break any buildings and doesn't crack any walls, which we actually do observe. And that could be done on purpose. That could be done on purpose to cover up the story that was before, and this is what is all connected to. It's all connected to the crime that we see, the post effects, or are the signs that lead us to thinking that it was a crime, is a criminal act, criminal activity. I mean, it was a council or something on this, and they had a meeting, of course, and they had it planned. And of course, they knew what they were doing. Okay.
No. So, for the record, how do I pronounce your last name?
Doesn't really matter. It's Druzhinin.
Druzhinin. Okay, I was just like wondering. Okay, so I have a number of people who are also interested in this topic, and you are the one you approached me, and you said, just contact me. So I thought, why not? So, yeah, because I look into it, and there are so many different areas it goes, and so I want to stay with what we can observe, and I'm also interested in your analysis of history and how truncated that is. And so, when we're talking about this hypothetical worldwide catastrophe, when do you place it, and do you think this is something that occurs more than once throughout history, or is this like something that was just a one-time thing?
Well, what we see a set of pictures, which are paintings, right? The gravures or paintings, with a set of pictures from 17th, 18th, and sometimes 19th century pictures that people were actually painting. And we see a set of pictures that were made by photographs, right? And those photographs come from 1840s and so on, 1850s, 1860s. Increasing number is like 1860s, 1870s, and before that we have like a few pictures, not very much. And we see some, we can see some streets, we can see some houses, and so while figuring this out and relating those pictures to each other, we see that it probably was caused by something in 19th century, and my timeline shows like it is like 1820s to 1850s, like 1845, 1846 could be also the day, because we see some houses that were built supposedly in the beginning of 19th century, but when we see those pictures, the paintings of those houses, we see them already built before. So it's like we cannot really rely on the paintings, because the paintings could be misleading us into the timeline. But we can see, we can trust the pictures of the photographs, because they can, they are more reliable to me, at least, because I can check out the 20th century, check out the end of 19th century, and check out the middle of 19th century, and figure out that something happened to the house or not, because we see the level of the floors changing, like the ground is like raising in the middle of 19th century. So it's like, supposedly, I suppose that it was before the 1850s, but not earlier than 1820s.
Okay, fair enough. So in your assessment here then, the thing that's missing then is that there's no clear historical description of this. This is not taught in schools. So we're talking about a worldwide event that would have been known everywhere, but then it's been erased from the textbooks. And so are you thinking that this is a natural phenomenon, or something used, or some kind of weapon that we may not understand at this time?
Yeah, I think it's intentional action, and right now I'm on the process of making the fourth part of the documentary, which actually relates the possible mining of ancient times to this mud flood, and actually ties up with the star forts also, because we see a bunch of star forts from on the plans of ancient maps, and we see them right now, so we can figure out that what they are, that they built from the same technology worldwide, which also can be proven the worldwide event, because if we have star forts everywhere, then we possibly could have the same cause, because the star forts could be controlled with the same network, right? And if they are in the network, actually, because they could be the network of the previous miners, and so on and so forth, because the star force actually doesn't explain the defense of the star fort, because it doesn't make sense. Any fortress, any small fenced amount of space is not safe for those who protect it. It's easily can be proven in any kind of discussion. I mean, you can easily smoke them out, you can just starve them out, you can do whatever to kill those people, and you actually can do it. So it's not a protection, it's not a defensive system. It probably had some other defensive purposes, and it could be used like we had in Avatar, like we had a miners which had a protected territory with some some energy weapons, or whatever you call it, or maybe shields, energy shields, that protected this territory from the local avatars and local animals and stuff like this. So this could be some structures that could be protecting those miners doing their job, and actually could be the stations between those star forts or cities, whatever we call it. And in Russian we call them stations, and this is the unit of the country house. It's like a small town was called a station, and it's very funny because most of those stations have gas mining stations, and the gas mining stations, the gas mining well looks exactly the form of the shape of the arrows coming out of the center. So it's like a fracking station, fracking well. And so the fracking can easily explain drilling, and drilling could explain the mud coming from underneath, because we have a bunch of pressure with the gas and stuff like this, and if it's not contained, or if it's not maintained very well, it could easily be a catastrophic even in our times, because we have all those spills everywhere, and so it could easily be explaining like this. So I don't know if it makes sense for you what I'm trying to say, but I'm on the way to figuring this stuff out.
Okay, yeah, another aspect to this that I find compelling is worldwide evidence. That's what made me pay attention. I thought it was a local thing in Russia when I first looked at it, and I kind of dismissed it. But then someone pointed out to me, no, the other indicator here is an almost universal style of architecture that points to a common origin. And so, would you speak on the architecture for a minute and what we're actually looking at when we're looking for or examining this evidence of some type of a flood involving large amounts of sediment?
I mean, this style of architecture could easily be explained with the colonial style that we see and we observe worldwide, and but they can say it's a fashion, it's the architectural influence or whatever you call it. But we see the paganism, the pagan style that was before the Christianity, so it couldn't be performed in the Christian countries or the Muslim countries or Hinduistic countries or Japan, but we have those buildings in all those cities, all those towns, all those countries. I mean, so it's like Star Force also the same architectural style. It's a red brick, mainly arched windows. All those red brick buildings, like I mean, the red brick production itself, it could be a worldwide production. Who knows? Because uh, it also can explain the technology and the style, because if they use the same material, they could be probably using the same techniques and technologies. But we see a bunch of so-called megalithic structures, right? This also can be found each and everywhere in Northern America, in Southern America, in Israel, in Egypt, in Russia, in Europe. We have a bunch of megalithic structures. In Japan, we have a bunch of megalithic structures. We have a bunch of pyramids in China. We have a bunch of pyramids in Egypt. So could be actually the case, because not only the megalithic structures are the same, the red brick structures are the same, the star forts are the same. What else we have to pull to this, consequence of, evidence?
Okay, so the universal nature of it, since it's pretty much uniform everywhere, it all sort of implies that whoever was behind it is behind covering it up and is in possession of whatever who came before had in terms of technology and knowledge about history. So, as far as our historical record, how far back do you think we can trust our history, if at all? Or do you think it's all pretty much made up in order to censor what was before the 19th century?
I mean, they use the same technologies they were using 200, 300 years ago. Check out the evidence of the technologies of 19th century. You'll find out that we use it today. Each and every day we have something invented, so-called invented, but actually we have it, pulled back from the 19th century, or maybe the beginning of 20th. So, and so are they. They use the political leadership technologies that they had before. So it's like divide and conquer, mislead, and control the opposition. So those who are in profit, actually they work as a managers, they work as a puppet show for those who control it. And I'm on the way to actually reveal the classes or the groups that are actually in control, the so-called order group. I've made a video about them. They are the high conspiracy group of leadership in military questions, and they control a bunch of different clans like banksters, religious mafia, and so on and so forth. And we have a nationalist and globalist also fighting right now. So there's two different other groups. They also have control of the previous one, to the banksters and so on. So it's all connected network, and they don't care about us. Actually, they believe they are some other kind of species, some other kind of humanoids. So they probably mixed with those parasites. They came here and started all this thing working, because we have a bunch of evidence of all those intrusions, the so-called floods in the Bible, and in different other mythologies, the flooding of Atlantis, so-called, disappearance of Atlantis, also is flood. So it's like flood is everywhere. In Russian mythology, we have a bunch of floods, and so it's and so on and so forth. Like it's like, I think the flood is actually the technology to enter the world. So they enter the world and they control it. They make the people believe in their controlled beliefs, the religions, so-called religions, and religions enslave the people mentally. They become sheeple and they don't care. So that technology is used all over again and each and every time. So you've asked about the resets, and I think yes, there was a previous reset. So, and we have a bunch of evidence that people actually were missing for a while, and we have a bunch of evidence of orphanage and all these kids, whole bunch of kids in the beginning of 20th century, whole bunch of kids in the beginning, in the end of 19th century, orphanage houses, all those trains of kids, circling and circling stuff. And I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but we have this evidence and we can, check it out by ourselves. We have a bunch of people who know their, ancestor lines for a couple of centuries, but can they really trust it, or can they really trust all those archives?
Yeah, that's what brought me into this. I was thinking, because I've been looking really hard at the media and at media hoaxes in the last 20 years, and those have become history because nobody challenges it in sufficient numbers. And I'm thinking, well, it's not like they just started hoaxing us when I started paying attention. So the mainstream media is a record of a very selective interpretation of reality that suits the elite. So there's no reason to think that history is not the same thing. So my interest in this was people going back at old pictures and questioning everything we've been told, because our histories are what form the basis for the political wars of today. And if they lied about the Civil War and its results, if they lied about those pasts, then what are we fighting over now? And so I'm just trying to get to the truth. And so I'm looking through this topic to see what people have uncovered about pre-Civil War and what we can actually rely on when it comes to the historical record. How objective is it? And I'm also interested in how this ties into religions. So what are your thoughts on let's say the Vatican, for example, or the papacy? Do you think that they have this long history of 2,000 years that they describe? Or do you think it's more or less a farce with a much younger history?
I mean, they are owners of different property, right? And most of this property this somehow related to churches, so, or cathedrals or something like this. But what we found in our research, that the people that lived before were using those objects, those constructions, different way. Probably we lost all this technology right now and we don't use it, but we can use it in some other devices, but we don't use it in those big places, except maybe at one place in Jerusalem, where we have a church, when one time in a year, in the Easter, pretty much soon, by the way, they're gonna light up the light, so-called light. But where this light comes from, somebody says it's some priest lighting up with this lighter, gas lighter or something like this. But somebody saw piezo elements or some ether lightnings on the wall. Somebody pictured this and somebody pictured that, and some physicist made even the scientific research there, and he figured out that it's a static electricity, some type of atmospheric electricity probably is lighting up the light. So if those devices were working that way, they were the power stations before, and the priests could be electricity workers because they have all those dresses that are protecting them from the electricity charge and all this stuff. And the people could be walking there to charge their devices. It's like a charging station, who knows, or maybe it was like something else. So they could be having like multiple purposes. I mean, the church crosses could be used as antennas, who knows, because people in Russia, when the television was booming in the 90s, they were trying to make different forms of antennas for new channels, because we have a limited wavelength that was promoted for those channels, and they were mixing those antennas, and they figured out the Russian church cross with this regular cross, and this little stuff here looks like a perfect TV antenna, and they had the perfect signal, and they even wrote it in some magazine, but it was forbidden to say about this. So it's like we have a bunch of evidence that all those churches are not what we know. And so when you ask me about this or that confession, this or that church, I just refer to what I said before. It's an order is controlling all this stuff. The religious mafia is religious mafia itself. It doesn't have any other definition. It's not a religion, it's a religious mafia. It's made for making their own purposes. So it's what I'm trying to say in my videos.
Okay. Well, so I've been really interested in Freemasonry and how they've taken the lexicon of stoneworking and turned it into a mystical system and a system, an allegorical system. And Albert Pike, who wrote the Scottish Rite, he wrote the degrees number 4 through 33. He said that the lower ranks are intentionally misled about the meanings of the symbols and the signs and the stories that they teach. And so when I think about that, it completely explains their cathedrals, how we're told that it means one thing, but it's actually just a cover for a hidden technology. And in a way, I can understand how that works, where an antenna becomes a cross, and it's keeping us on the exoteric, outside, uninitiated interpretation. And even the word elite and elect and electricity in the language, it even suggests something here, something of those who are elevated to know this stuff.
Illuminated.
Illuminated, there you go. So I could see how it works. I mean, if you were to flood out the masses of populations here, and then you rebuild, you could brainwash them and having them kneel before a direct TV dish every Sunday.
Yep, that's what they did.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And as far as history goes, to me, it's a no-brainer that it's totally controlled. But what I find most interesting about the mud flood is it suggests that we didn't crawl out of a dark ages, but that we may in fact have been dragged down a few notches. And that's where I'm interested. What are your thoughts on the so-called dark ages?
I don't think there were dark ages at all, because what we heard about the official paradigm. First it was Stone Age, then it was Bronze Age, then it was Iron Age, then it was antique times, so-called Greco-Roman times, Egypt times. Then it was the beginning of Christianity, which was referring to medievals, and then it was Renaissance, and after Renaissance it was some more dark ages and I don't know, maybe even those revolutions of the capitalistic stuff happened in Holland and England, and then it came boom, we have all those inventions, we have all this production going on in the 19th century out of nowhere. We have all those technologies from the 19th century that we still use for now for 200 years. Nothing principles of the internal combustion engine didn't change from the steam machine. All this electricity, we're still using it, not wireless. We use the wired electricity from the 19th century. We use television from the 19th century. We use radio from the 19th century. So it's like, in fact, we use turbines, all the turbines. I found out that turbines are used from the 19th century, and the first gas turbines were made in 18th century. So it's like, so the jet engines that we use in our airplanes, so-called airplanes and so-called jet engines, are the turbines from the 18th century. It's like very fascinating, because I was the question is simple. They lied to us. I mean, how can else they perform this way? Because they need to dumb down the population, because they need to break the education system. Each and every future generation becomes dumber. remember why we were so scared about the Generation X? Look what we have now. Look what we have now. I mean, it's really.
Yeah, I have this book I read a few years ago by Ayn Rand, The Romantic Manifesto. And in this book, she's contrasting the minds of the 19th century through literature with those of the 20th century. The architecture, 19th century, 20th century, and the art. And this book is basically saying that from her point of view, she says it's pretty obvious that man has for some reason, lost something. And she thinks it was a problem of philosophy, and she blames collectivism and the devaluation of the individual. But the more I look at it and her background, where she came from, I think she's someone who, in her own life, actually was able to perceive the difference pretty starkly, because now it's kind of hidden. But maybe she saw it through literature. And so I'm wondering here, obviously, if there was a higher civilization before, then there's going to be technologies that, of course, like you're saying, are from way back then that we're still using today. Hasn't been much progress since then. So as far as the architecture goes, do you think there's been any improvement on anything since then, or are we just making pale imitations?
I mean, they figured out that it's very expensive to build this architecture each and every time. So I think what they doing is they building maybe like 20% of decent architecture and 80% of crappy architecture right now. This is the Pareto rule that they use, and I think only 20% will survive the next reset, and they're gonna use it one more time after the reset, so they can establish their empires again. And 80% was gonna be just dissolve in a couple of years. So it's so crappy. I mean, it won't stick around for like 100 years or during the reset, because I mean, reset is long enough to all this stuff, glass, concrete, all this low quality construction will totally dissolve in water and rains, and so the nature will take over, and they simply will make maybe the highly populated areas of Siberia, of Tartaria before, look at them now, they're totally frozen with the mud. So the highly populated areas would be probably, prohibited to visit, or maybe be some type of Antarctica there or something like this. So they can change the paradigm each and every time, because the people will be literally in Stone Age when they wake up after reset and they find out that all their kids are stolen and they're just starving out. So it's like they probably will be. The technology is very simple. They have the teams of so-called firemen or bomberos, which are, hanging around these survivors. And if they find any books or something like this, they, make them burn those books. Or if they, right now, what do we have? We don't have any books anymore. We can easily be deleted by a simple pressing some type of button, and some virus will come in each and every PC and erase all the data. We don't have any books anymore. So
yeah, that's a good point. There was a famous library at this laboratory close to where I live, and I remember the year they shut it down and they replaced it with a digital library. And my problem with it was, well, now burning a book is just a matter of pushing a button. And then two, you get rid of serendipity. So, you browse through a library, you randomly grab something that catches your eye, and you find something you wouldn't have found otherwise because you weren't looking for it. Well, now with targeted searches, they actually remove that. And the yeah, exactly. And as far as the susceptibility for this information to be deleted, yeah, that's very easy. And right now, for example, people in New Zealand could be charged with a crime for possessing that fake manifesto from that event. And this is because they don't want you to get this information that doesn't go through their filters. And this is how they always operate. And in a way, it reminds me of pretty much every revolution. You destroy the old and bring the new. Anybody who has the old is a counter-revolutionary, and they have to be removed.
Yeah, this was exactly written in Fahrenheit 451. So, I mean, the idea of this bomberos and firemen came from this book. And so, I mean, this is how they control us. I mean, simply they can use each and every different method anytime. So it's like a game. They pick the method of reset and they do it. If they want to do a war, they do a war. If they want to do a bacteriological weapon, they do some type of epidemia, stuff like this. We have, like, in Dark Ages, the so-called epidemias of cholera and how do you call it? Uh,
like the bubonic plague.
plague, yeah. And so the plague columns I've been showing on one of my videos, they look exactly like the mud flood, so like the mud flood is coming from the skies, something like this, like fontaine is coming of mud coming towards the sky, something. So it's like,
Right.
they can tell us whatever they want.
Well, I've been interested in this subject for a while of floods because the myths, and then of course when I saw that Elon Musk's rocket, the BFR, was called an ark, and there's all this talk of an ark to Mars, and I'm like, wait, ark? Why? Because the world's going to be flooded. Why? Global warming. Who told us the world's going to get flooded? NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration that works with NASA. So they actually call it NOAA, and not only that, but their symbol is the dove flying over the ocean, which is Noah's symbol. So it's already scripted. And so I was already in my head thinking they're probably going to flood us out somehow. And only the people who buy into the space program will survive this thing because they're totally brainwashed, and they will think they're on Mars or something, and they'll be in Siberia. That's been my contention. I mean, it's just a guess, but I think they've been planning to flood us out. And I'm wondering, well, what is the flood going to be? Is it going to be water? Is it going to be a bubonic plague? Is it going to be nerve gas distributed by drones or something? I mean, it could be anything, like you said. And I do think you're right that they can pick and choose. And I say they, I mean whoever could possibly orchestrate and control such a massive slate cleaning where they just wipe the world clean except for their chosen. And even the stories about Revelations and Apocalypse always has the saved who are spared because they conformed, and then the rest are the sinners who are wiped out. So I kind of see it in their blueprints. So then when someone brought mud flood up to me as, well, if you're looking for a flood, it may have happened more recent, that changes everything. If it was 1,000 years ago, that's one thing, but a couple hundred years ago means we're in a tightly controlled, mediated reality.
Yeah. This is a problem because, what they don't like about this mud flood and why they send so many trolls, and why I maybe was a little bit pissed off when I saw your channel and I said, oh, one more guy trying to talk about the mud flood and, pull the people towards the topic at the point that he doesn't even understands what we were doing for 2 years, explaining stuff, because so many people came out. I mean, just a bunch of trolls came out immediately at 1 second, like when the Mark Sigan started talking about it and referring to mudflood in October. I mean, the huge hype came out. So it's like I was trying to monitor each and every new channel that's coming out to understand where we're going to. I mean, if they have we can have some good guys coming out, we can have some trolls. And so I have to know who is trolling and who is taking it serious and researching it. So right now, in the process of understanding who is really the future leaders of this movement. I mean, I'm trying to help everybody to promote their channels and to get more viewers, to get more subscribers, to get people know them. And I think you one of those channels that we supposed to be promoting, actually, and let you do it, because you have a better understanding of what's going on in your place, in your city. You can find more evidence by yourself, because this is the lack of information right now. People showing us the old pictures of 19th century, 20th century. What I'm trying to do in Russia, I'm going out on the streets and finding those buildings right now and checking them out, because it's really good evidence for all those critics, all those trolls, and we can shut them down with all this flow of evidence from each and every city that we live in. And so this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to ignite the people to go outside and check those buildings, and maybe go downstairs and talk to owners or something, because sometimes you cannot just go downstairs and check out if that was a basement, or does it have any signs of the mud flooded building. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do. And maybe I answered your questions right now, but it's a little late, so for me to follow what exactly you're trying to ask me.
Yeah, actually, I was leading to that because I was going to say, where is this going? Because in other topics I look into, like with the topic of um, investigating the space program and looking into what we've been told about our cosmography. We've been sold a bill of goods. The whole thing's false, and so we're researching it. And so I'm reverse engineering the big deception, and part of that means going down to the past. But I was thinking, I see a lot of channels getting lost in Bible stories and in myths, which is fine. But I want to find the objective facts to get a figure on where we are right now. And so I'm trying to stick with mainly the investigation. And I was thinking, well, if everybody interested in this topic goes to places in their area, and we can start making the case that, yeah, beyond just these older photos, there's stuff all around us, then we make some real progress, and it might actually trigger something as far
Yeah.
as, like, for example, downtown where I live, I've always noticed these old buildings in a certain part of town, similar structure, but they have radioactive basement shelters. So, and I'm like, when were we going to be hit with anything that would require bomb shelters beneath these buildings? And it's pretty consistent. And we're just looking around, and yeah, we do manage to see a lot of bricked up archways under certain areas. And so I'm looking, what are the common refutations? And people say different things. They raise the levels to sanitize, or they were raised up because of a layer of debris built up over centuries, which is absurd in itself. So I'm looking at the evidence that's being posited and then the counter evidence, and I'm just kind of going where the information leads, and I'm trying not to get stuck in any rabbit holes or any preconceived notions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I like where people are going with this, but I don't want to take too many leaps right now. So as far as like suppressed technologies, I'm totally aware of what could be and what the indicators would be. So really quick, I know it's late over there. What are your thoughts on these ancient structures being used for harnessing atmospheric electricity, and how can we validate that?
It's pretty easy because people like 2 years ago, guys were sending me footage, and I've been posting it. They doing pretty much the same stuff with the balloons. They putting balloons in the air, and with those wires sticking from the air to the ground, and measuring the voltage and all this. So it's totally proven. It works. We have a bunch of channels in Russia, and probably some channels in America that is screwing around with all this electricity stuff, and I've been showing a couple of those experiences. It totally works. It totally works, and it could be used, and it probably, but I'm not saying it was the only purpose of those buildings. What I'm trying to say is that those buildings were used in multi-purpose, and there was a network, like there was a network of star forts before that. The cities that were built near the star forts were the prolongation of this technology. I mean, this is the next step. First, you build a star fort, like mine the area, establish the energy route like gas or something like this, so it can, the profit can support the further city expansion. And then you put the city to the place, then you have to be more aggressive to locals. Then it comes out to slavery and the parasitic role of those miners that we are talking about. This is where it comes. So it's like, who were those miners before? Were they giants? Because we see a bunch of evidence that those buildings were also designed for giants. But we see some mythologies and books that are talking about giants as a regular situation in ancient times. So probably giants were living along the normal sized man, and highly likely that they were even protecting them. So, and maybe used and breeded by those men to protect them, of course, because giants could be just a weapon, just another technology, but used in ancient times, breeding some dragons, breeding some uh, animals that can be used as a weapon. So each and every biological weapon could also be like some mosquitoes could be transferred in disease, and so also could be used as a weapon. So I mean, there's a bunch of technologies that ancients could be using, and what we have to do right now is just stick to the evidence, like you're trying to say that you want to do the videos about technology. So maybe something, maybe you want to do something about the giants, maybe you want to do something about the flat earth. It's like all connected to this stuff, because reset is the key point to each and every thing that they've been lying to us. I mean, space program is also connected to the reset. Mudflood is connected to the reset. Alternative history is also connected to the reset. I mean, what we have to do is just show the people the truth.